Welcome to Chapter 12, our chapter on social psychology. It's quite arguable that the field of social psychology has had the greatest impact of all the disciplines in terms of other academic areas and psychology itself. We're going to look at many classic theories and also touch on many very pertinent and relevant issues to modern day society, such as systemic racism. So I think you'll find this chapter particularly useful if you're a psychology concentration person. You will be taking this course. And if you need a social science course or a liberal arts course, perhaps consider taking social psychology. So let's jump into it. Has social psychology impacted the field of psychology itself? Let's see. Of the 25 experiments generally considered to be the most important, the most influential in psychology, what number do you think would have to be from social psychology to say that social psychology has indeed had a big impact? And remember, there are many, many, many fields of psychology, social psychology just being one. So do you think it would need to be 2 out of the 25 to make it influential? 5 out of the 25? 10 out of the 25? Would you want to push half to say before you could say it's influential? Think a moment and make a decision. There's no right or wrong answer to that question you were just asked, but in terms of the factual part, which is obtainable, decidable, 12 of the 25 were from social psychology. That's pushing half. So has social psychology impacted the field of psychology itself? Tremendously. Absolutely tremendously. For a definition, let's say that social psychology studies how people, three blanks. Take a moment and see if you can decide what should go in those three blanks. Did you say id, ego, superego? Not so much. That'd be Freud's personality constructs. Physical, cognitive, and socio-emotional? No, that's what developmental psychology studies. If you wanted to think, act, and feel, or any synonyms, you are indeed quite correct, quite right. Does SCCC have a social psychology course? Why, yes, it does. Psych 226. So if you need a liberal arts elective, or a social science elective, or a psychology elective, it would be a good course. But if you're in the psychology concentration, you are actually required to take it. The book on the left, shown on the left, is what we're currently using in the course. So the social psychologists writing the research that you might be reading in these scholarly journals have used the scientific method to develop their hypothesis and to test it. So we just covered this way back in chapter 2, but this might be a very appropriate point to do a brief review. So before you go to the next slide, see if you can remember in order the basic steps of the scientific method. Don't peek until you do this, please. You've probably noticed from the emphasis of the experiment, its component, and the scientific method in this course, that experiments and the publication process that goes with them is critical to psychology, and particularly so in social psychology. So we need to learn more about these articles, which publish the research findings, which publish the data obtained from experiments and other research methods as well. So for our first step, we have develop a hypothesis. The asterisk means I'm going to have some cautions for you in the next slide based on common mistakes I see students make on tests. You cannot put the word hypothesis. It's a lazy answer. It's not a complete concept. So develop a hypothesis is a good answer, though you do not have to say develop a hypothesis for me. You could say, well, think of some different ways of saying develop a hypothesis, and I'll pause for a moment. Create a hypothesis, good. State a hypothesis, excellent. Formulate a hypothesis, you get the idea. So on the test, definitely tell me a phrase involving a hypothesis. You also need to know this hypothesis needs to be a statement, not a question. You'll see that on the next slide. And also, it must be specific. It's not sufficient to say that one variable affects another. How does it affect it? It makes it quicker, slower, bigger, smaller, and so on. So again, it needs to be a specific prediction. For step 2, you could put test hypothesis. That's a logical follow-up. Conversely, it's also very good to put gather data. Either one is good, but don't put both on a test. If you double list a step, it makes me think that you're confused. So choose one or the other, whichever you prefer. I've listed for you some of the different ways of testing the hypothesis: observational research, case study, survey, correlational study, experiment. So we have many options, including these, and some additional ones as well. The next step, you'll create a mountain of data. The next step would be analyze the data. Do you have to use the word analyze? No, you could interpret it. You can apply statistics to it, but you get the idea. More than just one word. Last step, and a lot of students stop there, and unfortunately they can't get full credit. The last step is to publish the results. Can you share that differently? Absolutely. Share the results is also very good. So absolutely positively make sure that you can easily list the 4 steps of the scientific method. So now that I've snuck in a little review of the scientific method, which might be very useful with the upcoming final and perhaps your upcoming assignment, let's take a look at the anatomy of a journal article, what we would expect to be there. Typically, there's an abstract, provides a good overall summary for the paper. So in a future course, if you're deciding whether or not you want to use that particular research article, there's no need to read the entire research article to make the decision. You can look just at the abstract. If it looks very good, well, then maybe read more on that point. After the abstract, there'll be an introduction. It will give you background information of research in that field, and will also tell you what the author is up to, why they're conducting this research. There's often a materials section, which will look at the instruments, either physical instruments or maybe psychological instruments, like perhaps the TAT or the Wechsler IQ test or the NEOPI personality inventory, and so on. So materials used, and also the methods, which would include sampling and assignment once they get into the study. The results section is often highly statistical, and often at an intro psych level, frankly, often can be skipped because it will be discussed in much more readily understandable terms in the discussion section. In this section, you will often find a description of what they found, the implications, and often they will discuss also possible applications of the research. And often the study will do a little bit of self-criticism. They might, for example, say the study should be run again with a wider sample or a larger sample. So it would include often applications as well as potential self-criticisms. Now, unfortunately, this slide does not include the last necessary section of the paper, the reference section. So, and it will be citing all the sources that were used in the paper. If they were cited, they will appear in the reference section, of course, in proper APA format. Now, I would also like you to know that for true journal articles, they are peer-reviewed, which means that experiment or that observational study or that correlational study, what have you, that research was submitted to a panel of experts. The panel of experts looked at the hypothesis and how it was tested. That would include their sampling procedure, how they analyzed their data, and if the conclusions they drew were justifiable. So this necessary critical step would not be found in a magazine, but is a hallmark of true scientific research, this peer-reviewed article process. This slide shows you what a journal article might look like if you actually access one of them through the library databases. So as you can see, it has a title. It has the authors clearly indicated with their academic institutions. It has the abstract, as we noted, an overall summary of the article. It has an introduction section reviewing previous research. If this was an experiment, which is not, it would have a methods and materials section. This particular article gives you a conclusion section, which in many research articles is subsumed in the category of discussion. Think of a journal as being basically a business, and they can create their products as they wish. So if they want to use a conclusion over a discussion section, well, that's their decision. And as noted, a reference section, which would indicate all the sources cited in the paper using correct format for the particular field. For our definition, let's say that social psychology studies how people, three blanks. Take a moment and see if you can decide what should go in those three blanks. Did you say id, ego, superego? Not so much. That'd be Freud's personality constructs. Physical, cognitive, and socio-emotional? No, that's what developmental psychology studies. If you wanted to think, act, and feel, or any synonyms, you are indeed quite correct, quite right. Let's consider our next topic, persuasion. I chose this one because there's a great amount of time spent by us trying to persuade others, and by others or businesses trying to, or political entities trying to persuade us. Let's define persuasion as attempts to change how others, oh no, three blanks. What do you think? If you think, act, and feel, indeed you are correct. And how is this done? It's by providing information and or appealing to the emotions. I want to pick an attitude, rather a persuasion changing campaign that we're all familiar with. Consider the anti-smoking commercials. Take a moment and think of as many of them as you possibly can. If you said an emotional appeal, I would strongly agree with you. Yes, it does have informational content, but most people are repulsed by the gaping permanent hole left in this man's neck by a tracheotomy. I assume that you did know that smoking is a leading cause of cancer, but did you know that 85% of lung cancers are caused by tobacco use? So in terms of this particular slide, it's hard to sympathize with a person. The person is just an X-ray. So if you said informational, I would agree with you. I assume that most of you have seen the commercials with this woman. I can't remember if she takes off her wig or puts it on. She was dying at the time she made this commercial and perished within a few months of it. So she knew she was dying when she made it, but she was trying to save others from her fate. So clearly this is an emotional appeal. You probably haven't seen this particular ad before. I think it's effective. I find it interesting to look at the differential reaction to my male versus female students. All in all, the female students find to be much funnier. I assume because for the male student, it's more of a aha, more of an informational message than for women. But in any case, the laughter that you might, or the chuckling you might have experienced would suggest that this is probably more of a emotional appeal than an informational appeal. But it is very clearly strong on both. Let's continue our discussion with persuasion, looking at 4 of the many persuasion techniques. You've probably used one on someone at sometime in the past, probably many, many times, and they've been used on you undoubtedly many times as well. Let's start with mirror exposure effect. The idea behind this is merely getting exposed to something will increase your liking of it. It assumes that you don't detest it at the beginning. It works much better for neutral things or things that you maybe dislike a little bit. Can you think of any examples of things that you didn't initially like, but they grew on you? Take a moment. Students often volunteer many answers. It might be a particular food that they didn't like it the first few times they tried it, and now they love it. It might be a style of music. It might be a particular singer, a particular actor, a particular genre of music or reading. It might be a haircut or a body ornamentation. You might make fun of it, and then later you're using it yourself. Now, the validity effect is often confused by students on a test, because if you'll notice the definitions, they start out identical, and many times on the test, the student just reads the first phrase and automatically goes to the mirror exposure effect, the first one that you learned. Clearly, you have to read the secondary phrase after the comma. Think of the word validity. If you ask somebody, is that valid? You're asking, well, is it true? So the validity effect, the more you get exposed to something, the more we believe it to be true. So if the more we hear a rumor, we believe it must be true. The more we hear a politician's claims, it must be true. The more we hear a company's product claims, the more we hear it, the more we believe it to be true. This is used as quite frequently by businesses and politicians. Next, consider a door in the face. Think of getting the door slammed in your face. You must have done something pretty bad, pretty outrageous, yes? So in this one, it's when a large, unreasonable request is followed by what you really want. Research is clear. You're much more likely to get your request if you use this technique as opposed to asking for what you really want. Take a moment and think, have you ever used this? Maybe on a parent, an employer, maybe a teacher. So think a moment. So if you ask for a raise, you always ask for more than you want. If you're selling something on Craigslist or whatever, you certainly put a much higher price than what you want. If you're asking parents for money, you certainly must ask for more than what you really want. If you're asking for a certain time to stay out nights, you certainly have to ask for more than you really want. And by doing this technique, you're more likely to get what you really wanted because you asked for much more. Next one also involves a door, foot in the door. It was named regarding the days of old in which men used to make their living by being a door-to-door salesman. He would knock on the door, the woman of the house would answer. She was a housewife, so she was there. He would put his foot literally into the door so she could not shut it and start talking his spiel of sales. She had to listen to it, and because she had to listen, she might like it, she might buy. So by putting his foot in the door, he was putting his foot into the door of an opportunity as well as literally into the door. So in this one, a small request, something that you're really not so interested in. A small request is followed by the bigger, real request. This one takes a little planning. Let's say that you want to have your neighbor take care of your dog for a weekend because you're going away and you can't take your dog and you don't want to take it to a vet and pay the money and stress out your dog. But your neighbor that you're friendly with has never taken care of your dog. Your neighbor likes your dog but has never taken care of it. So you might ask them one day after work, maybe you're working late, could you walk the dog? The neighbor does. And then another time you have to work late, you ask the neighbor and the neighbor does. Maybe give the neighbor a small gift each time, a small favor. And then you hit them up for the full weekend. You're much more likely to get this request. Or it could be maybe borrowing a sibling's vehicle for a weekend and you've never driven it. Well, maybe you want to start with a few runs of Stewart's first and buy them something too, and then maybe evening. So the small request puts your foot in the door for what you truly want. So these persuasion techniques are all tested, all very true, but now that you know about them, you've got to use your knowledge for good, not evil. Let's see how you did. In our first example, a big request followed by a small, that would have to be the door in the face. Next one, small request followed by a big one. That would have to be a foot in the door. The third one, hearing something a few times and believing it. The more you hear something, the more you believe it to be true. The validity effect. And the last one, the more you try it, the more you like it. That's got to be the mere exposure effect. How did you do? Let's consider one of these 4 techniques of persuasion. We'll have to wait to see which one it is. Let's apply it to global warming, or global climate change if you prefer. I'd like to start by asking you, what % of scientists do you think agree that it is a real phenomenon and that it is primarily caused by human activity? So put a percentage into your mind. And normally I have every student in the class give me a percentage. Usually low estimates are around maybe 50, 60%. High estimates are 100. What number would you choose? 97% of published climate change papers agree that it is real and that we are the cause. And yet many students say 60, 70, 80%. Why are they getting such low numbers? Because there's been a concerted effort by oil and fossil fuel corporations to confuse the public. They frequently say, scientists do not agree, scientists are clear, there's mixed evidence, and they keep saying that and saying that and saying that. Too many people in the public doubt global climate change. This does not occur in other nations, by the way. And you might know that we are the only nation that pulled out of the climate accord. So what should the 4 techniques of persuasion would these corporations be using? And you might notice that one particular political party, as reflected by our current president, has questions the legitimacy of the research and has even gone as far as to call global climate change a hoax. But back to our point, what technique of persuasion is being used? So if the more a particular point is repeated, the more people tend to believe it to be true. It is the validity effect. Consider the next slide, Neil deGrasse Tyson, when asked what he thinks about global climate change.